So welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. I'm delighted as usual to have John presenting on self-improvement on these Fridays. So John, take it away.
Cool, thank you. You can hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thanks for the introduction. Today we are talking about the two concepts, consistency and intensity, and why, as a general rule, consistency is preferable as a preferable attribute in the attacking of any goal or improvement of any circumstance in literally any area of our life. Why consistency is more preferable than intensity. We're going to explore the parallels and we're going to draw comparisons and a few contrasts in between. And then hopefully by the end, look at some questions and ask if these two can be imbued and coalesced. If we can do something consistently intense, in other words. So I did have a quote that I wanted to talk about and open this up with that was in the meetup description. I'm going to read through it and we're going to look at a few implications from there and then kind of transition into consistency. So the quote is from William James, who is the father of psychology. And he says, "There is no more miserable human being than one whom in nothing is habitual, but indecision, and for whom the lighting of every cigar, the drinking of every cup, the time of rising and going to bed every day, and the beginning of every bit of work are subjects of express volitional deliberation. Full half the time such a man goes to the deciding or regretting of matters in which ought to be so ingrained in him as to practically not to exist for his consciousness at all." So the first sentence, that's a powerful statement. That's a very strong promulgation. There is no more miserable human being than one whom in nothing is habitual, but indecision. Why would that person be miserable? I believe for a few reasons. One is namely, if you have any practice, any experience with, for example, meditation, you will realize the transitory nature and the proliferation of random thoughts that are just fleeting your consciousness at any moment. And it's important to realize that not every thought is constructive, not every thought is truthful, not every thought is worthy of being entertained. And I think that's very important to notice. So James is talking about how if we entertain every single thought, we have to sacrifice and devote precious mental resources and faculties to this expression of such a simple task, as he says, lighting of a cigar, drinking of a cup, waking up, going to bed, etc. In other words, everything has to be a conscious choice. Everything has to be conceptualized in the terms of pros and cons. You have to weigh out, okay, what is the result I get from this? What happens if I neglect this? And therefore, you're going to, again, waste a lot of time making these random haphazard decisions. So he closes with the latter half of this statement. These matters should be ingrained in him. So that arises the question, how are we to ingrain choices? How are we to ingrain decisions in our daily lives? And I think the answer to this is to establish some sort of framework of ideals or some sort of framework of an image or a vision, or in short, a goal. So when you are to ingrain something, all you have to do is remain consistent, remain congruent with this vision. So in other words, let's say you have an ideal vision of your future self, okay? Then instead of executing every single choice throughout your day-to-day life, which is, I don't know, scientists have measured, I think it's in the hundreds of thousands probably make choices and thoughts and decisions. Instead of making every single one in terms of pros and cons and weighing out and wasting a lot of time, you can ask yourself, is this decision congruent with my values? In other words, this is contingent upon that you've defined your values, you've defined your image, you've defined your goal. You have some sort of a framework to aim for, and you know what you want, or at least you know what you don't want. That could be just as useful and have just as much utility as a goal that you do want. So when you have one of these things in the future, what you do want and what you don't want, you can ask yourself, is this thought, is this decision, is this action, is this habit, is my engagement in this action going to lead me closer to that or further away from it? And all you have to do is remain consistent with your ideals, and then everything becomes ingrained in you. Okay, so this leads me to the next point where we're going to kind of talk into why we make choices. And I think every decision, every choice is made for the desired result, or for the desired circumstance, or for the emotion it's going to elicit, or for the circumstances it's going to produce. In short, the reward. And every decision, every choice, you can look at this motivated by one of two rewards. Okay. So we're gonna split these up, and we're gonna superimpose these over consistency and superimpose the other one over intensity. Okay. So the two areas of interest which we can be motivated by in our decision-making processes are the desire for immediate results or the desire for immediate alignment. Okay, so in short, results is that short-term gratification. This is usually transitory in nature. It's usually emotional decisions. It's usually what we want right now. And then immediate alignment is being consistent with your values, being consistent with your goal. You see that there's this saying, you cannot change your destination overnight, but you can always change your direction overnight. In other words, yes, you might be off track, just like a sea at sail is, or something, or a ship on sail in the sea, or like a plane, like an autopilot. It's going to correct course. You can look at when you're off course, and you can correct. So again, these two are the desire for immediate results and the desire for immediate alignment. Another one we can say is the desire to engage in pleasing actions versus the desire to have pleasing results. And let's look at that. Pleasing actions, obviously you're going to only do what is comfortable, what is expedient, what is directly accessible to your immediate environment. And if you want pleasing results, that means you might have to sacrifice for them. Okay, if you want a good physique, if you want a healthy life, if you want a healthy relationship, if you want a constructive friendship, etc., you might have to sacrifice for these things. You might have to go through some unpleasing actions to get these pleasing results, right? So there's a big disparity there. And finally, we can say this in the simple terms for intensity versus consistency. It's choosing what we can either choose what we want right now, or we can choose what we want most. And again, this is kind of congruent to what I was just talking about with having your values and immediate gratification. So I want to superimpose these things as intensity and consistency. So I would look at consistency in the realm of immediate alignment, the desire for pleasing results, and the desire to have what you want most. And I would look at the other side as the intensity with immediate results, pleasing actions, and what we want right now. Okay, so we're going to now look into the nature of intensity, and then we're going to transition into consistency. So firstly, intensity, I believe that this is made from, a lot of it is they're emotionally compensatory decisions. They're choices that are motivated by, they could be fear, it could be worry. I noticed most of the time when I want to do something that's like intense, you want to go all in on something, it's usually out of the fear of, you can say fear of missing out, fear of the possibility someone might be ahead of you, which is an illusion because everybody's on their own intrinsic individual journey in life. Nobody can be ahead or behind somebody. The desire for this of intensity, again, it's emotional, it's transitory, it's the equivalent, and I had this in the meetup description as well, it's the equivalent of dumping a bucket of water onto a rock. Okay, and this depends on your goal. If your goal is to make grooves in the rock, obviously this is not efficient. If it's to cover the surface area, maybe. But on the other hand, consistency would be the equivalent of letting the same volume of water drop at just a slower pace at a longer duration. And it's going to have a profoundly different effect. But it's, mind you, it's the same amount of volume. It's the same thing that was expended. Okay, and you can look at this as your mental faculties. It's the same volume expended, but you want to just expend your volume over a bigger temporal duration. So I think the desire for actions that are based off of intensity, I think the desire is actually virtuous. It's actually commendable. It's the desire for change. It's coming to realization of your undesirable circumstances. Maybe you realize you're behind in a certain aspect of your life. Maybe you don't like something and you want to overcompensate. Okay. Again, the desire for change is commendable. Absolutely. But the approach, I think, can be more constructively looked at through consistency. Okay. So, the next point that I want to, this is the natural kind of transition into an example of this. I want to look at diet. Okay, so if anybody wants to make a dietary change in their lifestyle, if they want to change their physique, I'm going to use this in terms of intensity versus consistency, and hopefully we can see the parallels. Hopefully we can see the extrapolations of where this might get us. So diet, let's say we want to lose weight. That's our general goal. We don't really have a deadline. We don't really have a pound percentage or anything like that. That's all fine. We can still have a general guideline of lose weight. We don't want to gain weight. We want to lose weight. Okay, we have two areas of framework. So we can look at it this way. We can look at it in terms of intensity. So let's say you're really emotional over your weight. You're impatient. You've struggled with diets and exercise in the past. You want to just lose, I don't know, something unrealistic. You want to lose 30 pounds by summer because you have a wedding to go to, or you want to go to the beach or something like this, right? It's usually emotionally based and you want to go all in. Okay, so you look at some research, you look at some diets and things like that, and then you essentially starve yourself. Let's say you eat about 500 calories less a day. And you're really hungry consistently all throughout the week. You're exercising all week, Monday through Friday. But then with that intensity, you might get burned out after a few weeks. And you might justify this to yourself on weekends by saying, okay, I can afford to go out. I can afford to indulge and treat myself for the hard work that I've put myself through Monday through Friday. Okay, I sacrificed 40 weeks. I've turned down so many delicious meals. I went to the gym instead of sitting at home catching up on my shows, etc. I deserve it. Okay, I earned it. Okay, fine. So you go out and you might go to a restaurant. You go out to a bar with some friends, whatever. You have some fast food. You have pizza, have beers, whatever you want to do. Okay, and let's say that let's say you consume a surplus of 1,200 on both Saturday and Sunday, 1,200 calories. Mind you, if anybody doesn't track calories, it's not that hard to do to be in a surplus of 1,200. So like I use the example of pizza and beer. For example, one beer already has 200 calories. The slice of pizza obviously depends on toppings and size and all this, but let's say estimate about 300. Okay, so 2 pizzas and 3 beers, you're already at 1,200 calories, about like that. So you keep up with this intense routine of starving yourself during the week and then rewarding yourself during the weekends. Okay, fine. It's balanced, whatever you want to justify it with, that's fine. So that's person A. Person B, on the other hand, says, okay, I'm going to make a consistent, I'm going to choose consistency. I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to kill myself. I'm going to start doing something I know I can do for long term. Again, like I was saying earlier, same amount of volume with the bucket of water on the rock, same amount of volume, longer duration. Okay. So they're only going to eat 150 calories less a day. That is virtually nothing. That is a handful of cereal. That is a few slices of bread. That is a half of a candy bar. 150 calories is nothing. So they only aim for a deficit of 150 a day. So by the end of 1 year, okay, these disparity is staggering. And this is assuming there's a few variables that I didn't mention here. This is assuming their daily energy expenditure is equal to their caloric input, meaning that they're exercising, they're doing what they have to do. They're not just sitting around all day, okay? So the disparity between these two is staggering by only the end of 12 months, okay? So person A, who says, I'm gonna starve myself, look at myself, I'm eating so much more less than you, I think I'm gonna be ahead of person B by the end of the year. You're only eating 150 less, but then again, person B is not indulging themselves on weekends, okay? So by the end of 1 year, person A, the person who is doing the intensity 500 calorie deficit, literally nothing has happened. Zero weight change has happened because they're again, you add up the 500 a day, they're in a deficit of 500 plus the 1,200 plus the 1,200 on weekends, 2,400, essentially the same. Nothing happens. Okay, if anything, they're with age, obviously, they might be in a little bit worse shape. They might look a little bit worse. Okay, person B, you do out the math, they have actually lost 16 pounds of fat. 150 calories less a day. That is it. 16 pounds less. Okay, so that's the disparity between consistency and intensity in a very practical sense of the word. And I think a lot of people overlook the concepts of consistency, overlook the importance, overlook the power, if you will. We all know this story innately. I don't want to bring up Aesop's fable every presentation, but there is so much wisdom in these. This is classically represented in the story of the tortoise and the hare, right? The hare is it's very intense. It's these short bursts of energy, and then it's tired, and then it catches up. It justifies its lack of consistency from whatever method. I've done enough work. I'm way more ahead than the other person. I deserve it. I deserve rest. Whatever you want to justify your lack of consistency with, so be it. But again, on the other hand, turtle, consistency will beat intensity. Okay, so we know this through Aesop's fable as well. Okay, so now I want to look at the concept of consistency, and we're going to explore a little bit of implications here. So the key point here in consistency is to make a consistent schedule that we can maintain for years, not for days, not for weeks. This is not transitory. Okay, this is a long-term game. Like I said, the person that was only eating 150 less, that is over the course of 1 year. And you can look at this in any single aspect of our life. Okay, you can look at this in terms of your intellectual development. Okay, reading 10 pages is better than reading an entire book in a month and then just going out of hiatus. Reading 10 pages a day. Okay, listening to a podcast for 30 minutes a day, or an audiobook, or doing research for a little bit of a time slot that you've allotted for your day is better than going all in on a course and then just abandoning the studies altogether. And you see this in a lot of areas of life. And I think an important concept to remember from consistency is, yes, all of these things are easy, of 150 calories less, of walking an extra mile a day, of reading 10 pages a day, listening to 30 minutes of audio, 10 minutes of meditation, etc., your daily disciplines. Or it could be in your relationships, like being communicative with your partner, expressing your desires, expressing what they mean to you, expressing gratitude, expressing thanks. These things are very easy. But it's important to remember what is easy to do is also just as easy to neglect. Okay, that's a very important point. What's easy to do is easy not to do. You can look at the 150 calories less. You can look at the 10 pages of reading and say, what am I going to learn in 10 pages? Nothing. That's a waste of my time. I'm just going to keep going on. Meanwhile, again, the example of person B, we can look at the same thing. Reading 10 pages, end of the year, they have this result. Being consistently in a good communication with their husband, their wife, their relationship, their friends, family, etc. But at the end of the year, they have this result, etc. You can look at this in all areas of your life. So consistency is essentially, in short, it's trading immediate gratification for immediate alignment with your goal, with your ideal, with your vision. Okay, and that's a very important trade. And the trade is made with the motive that I once heard a quote, and this is from Darren Hardy. This idea of consistency over intensity was partly inspired by his book, The Compound Effect. So if you are interested in this nature of discussion, I would strongly recommend that book, by the way. But he says a phrase, Darren Hardy, by the way, he was a publisher, old publisher of the Success magazine. He says a phrase I've heard from him, I don't know if it's attributed to him or not, but he says, success in any realm is never owned. You can never own success. You can only rent it. And the rent is due every single day. So you have to put consistent work in. You look at anybody at the top of their field, any prolific researcher, any scientist, any top professional athlete, okay, you can justify it and say, okay, they don't need to work anymore. They're at the top of their field. They are at the peak of their genetic capacity. Okay, they are a physical embodiment of excellence in sports, we could say. They don't, quote unquote, have to work out, but guess what? They are working out more consistently and harder and more intense than anybody else, than anybody who would arguably need to work that hard to attain these results. But they are at the top of their field because why? They do not own success. They are paying their rent. They are paying their dues every single day through consistent effort, through dropping a water on a stone every single day, day in and day out. Mind you, this disparity between consistency and intensity is somewhat relative. Using the example of a professional athlete, obviously their consistent routine to the average person is intense, okay? But for them, proportionately, it might not be as much as they can do. But they just know day in, day out is better than wildly fluctuating and vacillating performance in any realm of their life. So, because the important point too is that consistency brings us exponential results. So whenever we are inconsistent, whenever we withdraw from a habit, we don't only lose the habit or the result that one execution would bring us. We lose all of the combined past momentum that we were building from ourselves. So we robbed ourselves of all of our past choices right when we are inconsistent with something. Okay, so again, using the diet example, okay, you were consistent for 5 days, and then you justify it by just giving yourself 1 day, okay, 1 day of indulging in pleasures, 1 day of eating fast food. And I've always hated the phrase people say, who's counting anyway, when it comes to calories or anything like that. Who's counting? Nature, the law, okay, universal law of cause and effect is counting. Everything is accounted for in nature, okay? This is a mathematical certainty that with every calorie, it's going to add or subtract from our frame, our physique. That's a very concrete and utilitarian example. So to summarize, I have a few more points that I want to talk about in terms of embedding consistency into our daily routine. So the idea that throughout our days, everything that comes at us can be sporadic. Everything that comes at us can be unprecedented. Anything can be haphazard. Anything can be capricious. We can't plan what other people are going to put into our lives. But with consistency, my biggest recommendation, and what I've learned from a lot of research and learning from self-help books and personal development books and everything like this, what is always within our conscious control is both morning and evening routines. Okay. So you can look at this as like a starter and a finisher to your day. So in between, yes, this is haphazardous. We don't know what's going to happen. Chaos can ensue throughout our day, throughout our jobs, throughout our interactions with other people. But rest assured, we wake up every single morning, preferably or possibly in our own space with some degree of, or we could create that space by waking up earlier or going to bed later, et cetera, shifting around our schedule a little bit, giving yourself time. And in the personal development industry, the first hour of the day is always known as the golden hour. It's somewhat of a sail that sets the direction that your day is going to go in. So if you wake up haphazardly, and just like going back to William James's quote in the beginning, if you wake up haphazardly, you wake up late, you don't know what you're going to do, you don't know what you're going to eat for breakfast, you don't know what you have to do that day, you don't know your tasks, you don't know your goals, you don't know your deadlines. Everything is going to cost you precious mental resources. Every single decision is going to cost you priceless mental energy when they should be ingrained. So morning routines, that is my biggest piece of advice. Morning routines that are consistently executed. And then if you can't do it morning, do it night, or if anything, actually have both. So those are always within our conscious control in terms of intensity, in terms of imbuing some of these things, in terms of paying our dues every single day. We can always do it in the morning or in the evening. And the next point that I want to talk about is tracking. Okay, so this is huge accountability in terms of our consistency, and it actually brings us fulfillment. It releases dopamine when we see ourselves, we see quantifiable progress toward a goal. Okay, so using the example of intensity, I can understand why people engage in it, because you see immediate gratification, you see immediate results. If someone starves themselves for a week and they only drink water and they just sweat in a sauna and they go on a cardio and they do all these things, they might see 5 pounds on a scale drop in 1 week. They're really excited. They're really enthusiastic. They saw a profound difference, but then they justify it and they say, oh, I worked really hard. I'm killing myself. This is inconsistent. This is not sustainable. So I have to revert and bounce back. And then you destroy all of your momentum that you built in that week or that month, because I'm only viewing this on a week scale. Okay, you can mess up your physique and easily in that you built it a year, easily in a month. Okay, so with inconsistency, that is. So the idea of tracking, when you look at consistency, you can have some sort of a journal, or even like before I had my schedule that I use, I've been using it for 5 or 6 years now. Before I had my schedule, it can be something as simple as like one of these little notepads, and you can just write your disciplines or write things that you want to execute every day. So if it's consistency in reading, consistency in diet, consistency in exercise, again, anything is better than nothing. And what's easy to do is easy not to do. You could just check off if you did it or not that day. So you have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, if you're going to do weekends. And then you can write on the top column or row, whatever you choose to do. Okay, reading. Okay, exercise. Okay, listening to an audiobook, listening to a podcast, researching, developing my skills, working on my relationships, whatever you want to improve. You can just see a simple check off. And then by the end of the day, end of the week, end of the year, this is one of my favorite things to actually look in terms of quantifying my life. One of my favorite things to look at is my percentages. So I personally have 9 disciplines in my morning routine that I execute every single morning. And by the end of the year, I do this method of checking it off. By the end of the year, I can see actual percentage, a grade, if you will, on my reading, on my meditation, on my exercise, on socialization, on improving my skills in whatever aspect of life that I want to. And I can look at consistency. So you can get a quantifiable number on your consistency, on your progress. And then by the end of that year, again, it's trading the desire for immediate gratification with immediate alignment. And I think that is much more powerful. It is much more sustainable. And in the end, it's not a fleeting emotion. as intensity would be, as the rewards from intensity. I believe those are fleeting. Those are compensatory. They're very emotionally volatile, right? You're very high from this losing this 5 pounds. You're very high, and then you destroy your progress, and then you're very low. You're oscillating consistently. Whereas if you're going to execute something consistently, instead of these transitory emotional desires and being emotionally happy, I think it's a more deeper seated state. So I would look at this as the contrast between, like, I don't know, let's say happiness and fulfillment. Okay, fulfillment is like a state. It's much deeper than something transitory, like the release of dopamine in our neurology or something like that. So yeah, I think to summarize everything, I think tracking is really the most important thing that we can extract from the idea of consistency versus intensity. For if you track, you have immediate accountability with yourself, and you can immediately look at yourself and say, okay, if I repeat this day, if I repeat this week, you can look at any iota, microcosm or macrocosm of your life. You can take out any segment of it, and you can say, okay, if I repeat this 100 times, 200 times, 500 times, am I going to end up at a life that is desirable or undesirable? Okay, so yes, we are going to move into questions, and I have a few more for the breakout groups, but I will pass it off to Shrikant to read the questions.
Sure. So what I want to do is I want to raise a couple of questions, and then I'm going to hand it over to other people.
Okay.
So first thing is, first, amazing presentation, just love it. So I have two questions. So first one is about consistency. Looks like a critical thing is to kind of identify all the areas on which you need to be consistent, or basically identify all your values. So you have all of them down. So you are practicing consistency on things that really matter to you. And then you're also it looks like also you're trying to make sure that whatever it is that you're doing consistently is producing compound returns for you. So it looks like, it's like you're trying to do like a comprehensive capturing of your values on one hand, and then making sure that whatever practice you're choosing to be consistent on has that compound nature. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. The first point is the most important. Again, like I said, this is absolutely contingent upon the act of building your values, of at least knowing some sort of a ethereal or amorphous goal of some sense. Like I said, even lose weight, that'll do. Even though you should be specific, you should have numbers, but at least having values, that gives you a framework in which to aim. And if you don't have that framework, then consistency is not going to be satiating. It's not going to be rewarding in any sense of the word. If you don't have those values, I think you have a higher proclivity to engage in intensity, if that makes sense.
Okay, got it. Now I'm going to let's go to questions from the audience. Folks, we've got 4 rules. Number 1, raise your hand when you want to ask a question. You can raise your hand by typing a question, typing an exclamation mark, or raising your hand in Zoom. Number 2, keep on topic. Today we're talking about consistency versus intensity. That's the topic. Number 3, you can relate anything to it, but please keep on topic. Number 3, be brief so we can cover as many questions as possible. And number 4, be courteous. Feel free to disagree, be absolutely candid, disagree with anybody on anything, but do so courteously. All right, so it's going to be Joseph, Jory, Diana, Anita, Corina, Chris, and Sean. All right, Joseph, go ahead.
Hey, John. Wonderful presentation as always. Thank you. I have a quick question. Like you had mentioned the William James comment in the beginning, that where nothing is habitual is, and I had it written down.
Indecision.
Was that?
Indecision.
Yes. And the idea, would you rather have nothing habitual or everything to be habitual? Would your answer be based on your personality type? So essentially, where if you have everything that's habitual in the sense that you know, you can get caught into complacency. But where you have nothing habitual, you know, it's chaos, but it may lend itself to a design thinking process per se. Anyway, but would your personality type dictate which one you should be? Because that may help guide you objectively to choose where to measure yourself.
Absolutely. I do agree that temperament is a large influential factor. I mean, we were talking about this after last time in the breakout groups. We were talking about MBTI and cognitive functions, which is going to be one this weekend. I actually strongly recommend everybody attends the MBTI and cognitive function meetup. For this will help us realize a profound tool. I think MBTI and realizing your cognitive functions, realizing your dominant and tertiary functions and your inferior functions can be a profound tool for self-improvement, or also realizing blind spots. But to answer your question, I do strongly believe so, yes. Judging, this is mainly in the sense of judging versus perceiving. People ending with J tend to be more structured, tend to be more rigid and analyzing, and P, perceiving, is kind of more like go with the flow, open-minded, free-spirited. They're going to explore different potentials before making a decision. Whereas particularly my temperament, like my proclivity toward everything, I always valued discipline. I always valued consistency. And this could be obviously because conditioning, but obviously I think also because my temperament, because my personality type, I do think that. And there is some sort of a balance you must find, because I agree with you. If everything is habitual, you have no room for spontaneity. You have no room for external perspectives. You have no room for opposing viewpoints. You might just be confidently incorrect in all of your actions, but then just justify it with, oh, at least I'm consistent. Okay, you're consistently incorrect. That's not good consistency. So yeah, I think there's a good balance to find, but I do think everybody can benefit from having a lot more things habitual as a general rule.
Next question is from Jory. Jory, question or comment? Go ahead.
Yes. So I thought it was a very interesting presentation, John. I wanted to say that your perspective can change as you age. I'm 61 and I think my perspective has changed because I don't have as many options, say, for physical activity as I did 20, 30 years ago. And accordingly, that shows how many choices I have. Less choices in some ways, and so I have to be more analytical about what I decide. Secondly, I'm going to give an example. One of my hobbies is ballroom dancing, and I'm teaching my neighbor during the shutdown to dance with me because the dance studios are closed. And I was saying, oh, I've done it this way for 2 years, but I'm going to refer to the videos online to make sure I teach you the standard. And sure enough, I'd been doing something for 2 years that didn't really meet the standard. Now, most of my dancing is quite passable, but we all have habits that come from consistency, that come from doing it a certain way every week. And without the impetus of her wanting to know, which adds intensity to the project, I did the research and I said, well, I've been doing this wrong. I think a lot of us need to revisit that area. And
Go ahead, John.
That's my offering.
Yeah, I mean, this is tailored off the answer to the last question. I do think there was a specific balance. Like I said, we can be doing something, just because something is consistent doesn't mean it's productive. Okay, we can be doing unproductive things or incorrect things or immoral things or deconstructive things consistently. That doesn't inherently make them virtuous because they are repeated. Okay, that's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying if we are to make constructive change in our life, if we have a goal, if we have a desired ideal, if we have a vision that we want to do something, you want to become an excellent dancer, you know it's not going to be accomplished by dancing rigorously until exhaustion one time a month, rather than dancing, I don't know, 30 minutes a day, or dancing 3 times a week, or, you know what I mean? I'm looking at that contrast. That would be more suitable for progression, for growth. than dancing to exhaustion one time a month or anything inconsistently but intense. That's my point.
Next question is from Diana. Diana, go ahead.
What's going on, John? Hi, Shaquan, and everybody. So I guess I gravitate towards these forums because I feel like I always try to find some way to implement these strategies that I believe in into my life. I want to integrate them in the best way possible. So as a woman of color right now in America, I think that one of the things that I can use to, to integrate this concept into my life deals with unconscious biases that, not only I, but I believe that all of us may have. And I think that to follow Jory's kind of idea of, and yours, about bad habits, being solidified in us and the constant need to address these habits so that we can break them. I guess my question to you, John, is how do you suggest, or what kind of framework do you suggest for habituating the habit of, untangling these unconscious biases that we may have? It's a different kind of habit that I think that I would personally like to form in myself.
That's a very interesting and prolific line of thinking that stemmed from that question. I do realize there's a lot of propensities that are unconscious in us, and we can go on an entire rabbit hole on this. We can talk about Carl Jung and developing the shadow. You can talk about these Stanford prison experiments. You can talk about the book called The Ordinary Men about Nazi Germany. I think the biggest thing is realizing the propensity for evil within each one of us, and then doing our best to ameliorate that and make it conscious. For obviously Carl Jung says, whoever does not make the unconscious conscious, it will direct his life and he will call it fate. So in other words, you are mindlessly enacting, you're being a mouthpiece, you are being an intermediary device for these biases, for these prejudices, for these immoral actions and behaviors. And I think obviously the best thing to do that would to be, I think personally, to experience a bunch of different perspectives and outlooks, and like mix with as many different realms of thinking as we possibly can. Don't get trapped in an echo chamber of people that share the same beliefs and values as you. I mean, there is definitely power in like reinforcement and being in agreement and being in accordance and finding mutual agreement for truth. But at the same time, if you remain in this chamber, I think it could be very detrimental, very destructive to only go down one line of thinking. The philosopher Nietzsche actually says this: the quickest way to corrupt a youth is to have him hold in higher esteem those who think similarly to him than those who think differently than him.
Thank you. Next one up is Anita. Anita, go ahead. Okay, Anita asked if I could read her comment. I'll take that next. So Corina, go ahead. Corina, are you there? Okay, next one up is Chris. Chris, go ahead.
Well, my first question, first was just a commentary. I learned about the 1% rule. I revisited a couple months ago, and I've been putting it into practice as far as learning a language, and it's been really helpful over these last 2 months, just dedicating at least 20 minutes a day, but it has to be consistent every single day, and I'm seeing results for this first time, where in the past I would put all this effort at the beginning and then give up after 3 weeks. And there's actually a language program called Drops, where the idea is learning drop by drop, and you just do it consistently every single day, and it tracks your progress, and you could see at the end of 2 months how many vocabulary words you've increased. I was just wondering, what's the name of the book that you mentioned? Is it The Compound Effect, and who is the author?
The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. By the way, what is the 1% rule? You mentioned that. What is that?
Basically that it's basically the compound effect, that if you're trying to learn something, if you just try to improve 1% every day, instead of maybe trying to take a giant leap, just 1% every day, over time it will add up and compound. Yep.
Yeah, The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. It explains this entire point like beautifully, much more simplistic and effective than I can. Again, he was the publisher of Success Magazine. He's interviewed dozens and dozens of literally the world's top successful people in all kinds of industries and then he found patterns, and he put it in a book similar to Napoleon Hill. But yeah, Darren Hardy, The Compound Effect. It's a wonderful book, very practical, very useful. He gives examples of like, this is the example of the 150 calories a day less. It's actually from that book, by the way. And then he explores other things like walking a mile a day, etc. And if you like that book, I always pair these two together. Atomic Habits by, someone just typed it in the chat. Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's an excellent book.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Right. So I'm going to read out the question from Anita. She says, could you address when habits become addictions, like with exercise or even improvement?
Addictions in so far as improvement, I don't know that that would be a detrimental addiction. I mean, and this is going back to the first point that I raised, every choice we make is for the desired result. Okay, so it's not, and actually, if Jeff is in here, he gave me this example in a discussion at group after. He was talking about, okay, what do you want? Okay, you write down these things. Let's say I want a nice car, I want a nice house, whatever. You ask yourself why you want it. And what you're really seeking is not that material object. That is simply the license. That is simply the medium. That is simply, again, the intermediary between you and the desired result. Usually it's an emotional gratification. Usually it's a sense of fulfillment, a sense of community, a sense of peace, etc. So in terms of addiction, it's typically compensatory in a way that is to an extreme. Okay, you feel an extreme lack. Again, I could have no idea what I'm talking about, but in my interpretation, you feel like an extreme lack, and you overcompensate so far that you begin to manifest these addictions. But as far as personal development, I don't know that a beneficial habit would go too far. Like, people might justify that. I think inconsistent people might justify that and say, they'll look at like people they call gym rats and say, oh, but they're working out so much, they're unhealthy. I think that's very rare. And I think a lot more people don't work out and they're unhealthy because of their inconsistency than their consistency.
Okay, Karina, do you want to ask a question? Can you go ahead and unmute yourself? You got really amazing 3 questions typed out. So would you like to ask them?
Okay, yeah, I just had been having trouble with my audio, so.
Okay, do you want me to read? I'll read it out then.
Okay, thank you.
But let me have somebody else go first, and then I'll read it out. All right, so the next one up, give me a second, I lost this. Okay, I don't remember who's the next one. So Pandu, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. John, thank you very much. Great presentation. In fact, I do know Darren Hardy from the point of that he sends everyday morning Darren daily videos, and I follow them pretty much consistently. But here's a question I have, or a comment, or a thought. I totally understand the importance of the consistency and tracking the progress. What I'm trying to struggle is that it may require a little bit of the intensity as well, along with the consistency. I mean to say that, hey, is it doing 10 minutes or 15 minutes, anything? How do you measure that intensity along with the consistency, so that it can have a good balance really to get what you wanted? Is there a way you have an idea to balance the intensity along with the consistency?
Yeah, I would say anything you can do that is, 1, it's constructive. 2, it's challenging you. So you're at the edge of your abilities, edge of your capacities, edge of your comfort zone. So it's not just, okay, you can be consistent with something that's not challenging. So if I did 10 push-ups a day, sure, that's consistent, but that is not challenging me at all in the least. So I want to do, I don't know, 10 some amount of sets of something that's going to challenge me a day. So you're going to be on that border. And that, again, this is obviously intrinsic and idiosyncratic to each individual. But also the distinction to make most importantly is whatever you can do long-term, whatever you can do for, I would say 12 months or more, every day, that is consistent. Where I used the example earlier, using dancing. If somebody's going to dance to physical exhaustion 1 time a month, that's not consistent. It's not sustainable. Okay, so that's the biggest distinction. Is ask yourself if your routine is sustainable and challenging. And by the end of this year, you're going to be exponentially greater, more successful, more competent, more fulfilled, etc. Whatever result you're looking for, you're going to be better, exponentially better in that area by the end of that year.
Thank you.
Next questions are actually very similar to these. These are two questions from Karina. The first question is, are consistency and intensity always mutually exclusive? And the second question is consistency maintained through sheer willpower?
Those are good, very good questions. Okay, so mutually exclusive, not all the time, no. You can be, and again, I use this example with like athletes. You can be, they're pretty much, I mean, on a relative scale, they are pretty much consistently intense, right? Their workouts, their regimes, their diet, their exercise, their performance, everything, their entire lifestyle is very demanding on their body. You can be consistently intense. Let's say one time a week, you can push your comfort zone and do a different set, do a different workout, change up your routine. And that might be interpreted as intense in terms of like your bodily capacity. Like you're going to push yourself and you're very sore. Okay, that's intense, but you're doing it consistently in a smart way, obviously including enough rest for you to heal and recover. I think that's finding the balance, is enough rest. But no, there's plenty of exceptions, and that's actually why we're in a minute or two we're going to get into these breakout groups. That's why I asked the question: can we find exceptions to this general rule? I'm only looking at this as a general framework of like typically consistency is better than intensity in most every single area I can think of in looking for better results. And the so. Remind, what was the second part?
Let me elaborate. I want to throw in William James' take on this, which is really fascinating. You know, you started with a great quote by William James, but he actually has some interesting things to say exactly about this issue. Now, the way in which you are looking at consistency is like emotional intensity. The way in which he looks at it is the effort of attention. So, for example, he defines attention as focusing, or he defines willpower as paying attention to difficult objects. And he's very much aware that attention is expensive. Mm-hmm. So the way he looks at consistency is that you pay attention to figure out what you need to do, what you're doing wrong. And that's very, very hard thing to do. It is very intense. You're putting a lot of intensity in that. And then as a result of that, you actually come up with a standard way of doing things. So you push whatever cognitive work that you have done into a habit so that it no longer takes any attention. So the attention remains free. So the whole idea is that most of the times you can't really be paying attention because it is too expensive. So you use the attention that you have to systematically make more and more things part of your habitual or part of your consistency, so that your capacity to produce that intensity of attention is used effectively. Instead of using that as a primary means, use it as a way of training your consistency mechanism. That's how he looks at attention. Any thoughts?
I profoundly agree with that point. Attention is extremely expensive, and we can't afford to expend all of that energy on trivial decisions. We cannot afford it. We cannot manage to have that consistently and then desire the improvement of any area of our life when we are expending so much precious mental energy and precious resources on, again, such trivial and frivolous manners. So I do think that is the importance of making things habitual, making things unconscious. Obviously, it requires a little bit of more deliberation, and you might argue intensity in the beginning to get yourself going. And I always think of the equivalent of the metaphor of like getting a train going or getting a jet to take off. It uses the majority of its fuel in the beginning because it likes being, obviously Newton's laws, whatever is at rest, hence remain at rest. It's a third law. So it takes a lot more energy to get yourself out of whatever rut you're in, out of whatever habits you're in, out of whatever whatever thing you're doing habitually and unconsciously, it takes a little bit more energy to do in the first place. So you might argue that as expensive an attention. But once you have it down, I don't know, researchers say 20, 30, 60 days. It always differs, but a month or two, then you can afford to execute on these things almost mindlessly. I mean, they are productive things, but you can execute them almost mindlessly. And then you can suspend your precious resources and attention for other more efficacious and things that are worthy of your attention.
Excellent. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Sean's question, and then we'll come back to Corina's question. Sean, go ahead.
All right.
So the first two questions seem to touch on the idea of adaptability. And this seems to be difficult in certain instances of being consistent and or being intense. If you're intense, then you're really focused on doing what you're doing, and you don't adapt to be less intense. And then if you're really consistent, you can be consistently bad, and you don't adapt to become better. So how does adaptability really fit into this? And in certain instances where you are being consistently bad or intense, how do you recover from those if you go too far?
There is only one effective way that I know of, and that's why I said that is the most important part of this entire discussion, and that is tracking. Okay, if you do not measure anything, you cannot improve anything you don't measure. Okay, so if you want improvements, you have to at least have some tangible sense of where you are. Okay, point A and point B, and you can look at your trajectory toward this. You can look at any deviations you might have imposed upon yourself through lack of consistency, or on the other case, which is an important point you brought up, consistently underperforming. Okay, that's just as bad as being inconsistent because you're not getting anything done. So I think that's where tracking comes in. I think that's where realizing, experimenting with the confines of your abilities and potentialities and capacities in whatever realm you're doing. Again, I keep using fitness because it's an easily quantifiable and tangible result we can always measure with a scale or with body fat percentage or calories, etc. It's always tangible. That's why I always gravitate toward those examples. We can be consistently underachieving, meaning we never get stronger. We're doing the same repetitions of the same weight over and over a year. That's not going to do anything but maintain our current physique. Like, most people don't want to maintain current physique. They want to change their physique. That's why they go to the gym in the first place. So that's consistently underperforming. Whereas like intensity, that's just as important, because you can be just as far off track with intensity as like I said, you go to the work, you find a personal trainer, you go to work out with him once a week, and he kills you, and you're sweating and you're exhausted and you're sore and you can't even walk the next day. And then again, I use the example of you go out with your friends, you go to the party, you eat pizza, drink, etc. You're inconsistent. You destroyed all of the momentum which you potentially built up for yourself. So in both scenarios, you are running blind without tracking, without data. You need data. You need some sort of a feedback system. And that's the most important part of this entire presentation, I would say, is tracking your life, having some sort of a system or schedule for your life.
Okay, so we'll go with Taylor, and then we will go to Corina. Taylor, go ahead.
John, I was wondering if you could expand on your tracking method and specifically like what that looks like for you, especially if you're quantifying it at different points and, you know, at the end of the year. I imagine it's some sort of like digital tracking. Yeah, if you could just talk about that quickly. And then also, I'm just curious about what your 9 things are that you do in the morning. It seems like a lot.
Okay, so it's a long topic in terms of what I have in my schedule. I actually have the entire thing on my website right now. It's called, I call it a system for self-analysis. It's a complete encapsulation of where you are, where you want to go, what you have to do to get there, how to measure and track everything. I think Shrikant will put that in the chat. I'll put it in after. But in short, I kind of track what I do every day. I track my goals, my to-do list. Everything is on paper. I always preferred it that way. I have a stack probably about this high. Since I mentioned earlier, I've been doing it for 5 years. So I have data on every single day of my life since Sunday, March 22nd, 2015. That's when I started tracking my life. And I have data from every single day since. So if I'm not where I want to be in health, I can look at, okay, what did I eat for this month, this year, this entire year, can look at everything I ate, down to the calorie, down to the macro, down to the carbohydrate, fat, protein, etc. So I'm a very avid believer in tracking. I love data. This could just be temperamentally like idiosyncratic. I just love looking at numbers and data and everything. But so to answer the question, the 9 isn't really a lot. It's entirely habitual. So it is, I have reading, I have an audiobook, and the threshold for this are pretty, they're not accurately that defined. As long as I sit down and read something, it's usually while I'm doing something else, while I'm eating or while I'm out or something. I don't really have like, 20 pages, 30 pages. It's just read. So I have read, I have listen to audio. So this is in the confines of a podcast or audio or YouTube lecture or something on my phone or audiobook, whatever. I have practice music. I'm trying to get better at piano. So that's something I want to do consistently. In the past, I've been very inconsistent, and this whole presentation is partly psychological projection for me to ingrain the importance of consistency in my own mind, because I've been inconsistent with piano, for example, in the past. So practice music, meditation, visualization of my goals. I have write down everything I'm grateful for half a page. I have exercise, I have socialize, and then I have stretch, like some mobility work for maintaining exercise. And those, mind you, all those things are executed. 8 out of 9 of those things are executed within the first like 45 minutes to an hour of my day. It's just like clockwork. I wake up, I don't even have to think about anything. It's just, I know exactly what I'm doing. So.
Okay. Karina, would you like to ask the question, or shall I go ahead and ask it for you? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask. So the next question, go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so my question is, so have you always been like this? OMG. And what advice would you give an implicitly motivated person, both held back and led by their intensity, like both intense emotions and passionately held values, beliefs, who also, by the way, is an INFP?
Okay, so repeat the second part of the question. It was a little quiet. I couldn't quite hear it.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
I heard, have you always been like this? You said, what's your advice to somebody who's I don't know, you said lacked in emotions or something?
Yeah, okay, so someone who like identifies a lot with the intensity and like understands how that holds them back, but also feels motivated by it in terms of the intensity of their emotions, even though they're temporary, but also passionately held beliefs.
Okay, cool. So there's a way to imbue these things. Well, okay, so first I'll address the first one. Have I always been like this? I mean, I've always been, if by this you mean like disciplined and consistent and having high social values in these things, I would say no. I would say it started, it's a very long story, but it started in probably 2012, 2013, something like that, when I realized it was born out of necessity. I wasn't satisfied and fulfilled with my circumstances, with my life. So I actually remember this exercise to this day. Late December of 2011, I was randomly scrolling on my phone. I was bored, and then I opened up a notes app on my phone, and I literally designed my ideal life. And it's kind of funny because that was 9 years ago. I don't have the note anymore. It was on an old phone, but I'm pretty confident and certain that I literally described my current life right now. And this is a yearly exercise for me now. So I describe all the attributes, all the characteristics, all the personality traits, all the results that I would want to have, and then I slowly begin to work toward that individual. And then, like I said, if you have that ideal, you have that goal, immediate alignment becomes very fulfilling and very gratifying. And so for your second point, I think accountability would be of great utility, and accountability can be personal in the sense of tracking. If you're a disciplined and like, what word would you use? You have the ability to like reprimand yourself and like, I always tell myself, earn your pleasures. If I didn't earn something, if I was inconsistent with something, I don't deserve to watch a movie. I don't deserve to do this. I'm kind of tyrannical with myself though. So I don't know if I'm a good example, but I think tracking can be intrinsic accountability, but maybe also something that can help is accountability partner. So you have a group chat, you have a friend that you text, and you say, okay, here's my weekly to-do list. And then if I don't complete them, I have to pay you $20. I have to pay you $50, something like that. Or they can like publicly post, or if you publicly post it, if you have social media or something, I'm going to do this week. That like accountability, it's like constantly looming over your head because it's real. And I think too many people live their life in like a sense of cloudy vagueness, because once you define goals, you clearly set up parameters for failure. And a lot of people aren't comfortable with failure because they have a poor relationship with failure. They don't look at it as a stepping stone. They look at it as an end, okay? A lot of people, and there's many reasons for this, from conditioning, from schooling, from education, from society, et cetera. So yeah, I think, in short, I think accountability, having an accountability partner can help. If it's not like intrinsic, if it's not valued by yourself, like tracking, if you can't reprimand yourself, maybe have someone else reprimand for you. Or another good way, instead of like punishing yourself, you can reward yourself. So you can say, if I'm consistent 5 days a week or at whatever stretch of time, I get to go reward myself with this. Not like the example though, like I gave with the person eating pizza every week. That's not good. But reward yourself in some small way that's not going to mess up all of your progress.
Okay, last question is from Bear. Bear, go ahead.
I just had a very simple question. I just asked, when do you wake up and sleep?
Okay, so I wake up at 7 a.m. every morning. I try to make it consistent. That's an area of my life that has a high variability because of my varying exercise routines. I actually have, again, I referenced to earlier, I love looking at data. I actually wear one of those like wearable fitness devices. It tells me my heart rate variability, my activity level, how recovered I am, how much I exercise today, my readiness for exercise, etc. So I kind of plan my workouts off of this, how intense I can go. And I think that's actually a good example of being consistently intense, at least something that I try to do. I look at, like, I'm smart with it. Obviously, I look at my metrics. I don't like disobey it. If it says, oh, my body's still recovering, I'm very sore, I might take it a little more easy and I might sleep in a little bit. So that's an area of my life that I want to be, I guess, more consistent with, ironically. Practice what I preach.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, John, for another fantastic presentation. Now we'll go to the breakout rooms.